Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. Every town has its hidden stories, little pieces of history that don't always make it into the spotlight. Stockton, just across the river from Newcastle, is no exception. In this episode, in our occasional series Memories of Newcastle, we'll look back at one of those forgotten chapters, a factory that once stood proudly but has now almost vanished from memory. Join Society member Lea Harris as she takes us back to the days of the Stockton Tweed Factory.
How many of us knew that a tweed factory existed in Stockton in the 1840s? I certainly didn't until a few years ago when someone mentioned it at a meeting I was attending. I then found the Newcastle Family History Society had some articles on the tweed factory, and these proved to be very interesting. To firstly introduce Stockton, it is the only residential suburb of Newcastle that lies north of the Hunter River, located on a peninsula on the northern side of Newcastle Harbour. It is surrounded to the south and southwest by the Hunter River. On the eastern side are sand dunes and surfing beaches, with numerous shipwrecks at its north, while on the western side there are marshes where many migratory birds can be spotted. For many years, Stockton was linked to Newcastle's central business district at the south by passenger and vehicular ferry services. While there is still a passenger ferry service, vehicular traffic is now connected by the Stockton Bridge that opened in 1971. The website 2 Minute Postcards tells us that during the late 1800s and early 1900s, sailing ships, especially those tying up along the Stockton riverbank, would discard their ballast of stone and rubble. This gradually built up a new shoreline along the peninsula, creating what is now known as the ballast ground. The ballast came from countries all over the world and includes stone from Mauritius in the Indian Ocean and soil and gravel from Peru, Chile, and Ecuador in South America. But perhaps the saddest source of ballast rubble was from the horrific San Francisco earthquake in 1906. This severe earthquake sparked a massive fire which burned for days. 3,000 people were killed, and 80% of the city was destroyed, literally reduced to rubble. A good portion of it became a tragic cargo of ballast that was shipped all over the world, including to Stockton. Stockton's location on the Hunter River allowed the area to become one of the first industrial suburbs of Newcastle. Throughout the 19th century, Stockton became heavily involved in the coal mining and shipbuilding industries. On the 9th of September 1797, Lieutenant John Shortland became the first European to set foot on the land that would later become Stockton. It was originally called Pirate Point as the result of escaped convicts who stole the Norfolk, which shipwrecked on the peninsula in 1800. The southern tip of the peninsula, near the northern breakwater, is still known as Pirate Point. Dr. James Mitchell, born in 1792 and passing away in 1869, was a Scottish-born physician and industrialist who, after being appointed assistant surgeon to the 48th Regiment, then stationed in Sydney, arrived in Australia in November 1821 on board the John Barry. During years spent working in the military service, part of this service being in the Colonial Medical Department at Sydney Hospital and in private practice, Mitchell developed a passion for agriculture. He received his first land grant in 1822 in the county of Camden. Over the next 15 years, he acquired many more land holdings via grants and purchase, including the Burwood and Rothbury estates in the Hunter region. He became well known as a perceptive land dealer. On the 6th of November 1835, Dr. James Mitchell received a grant of 70 acres of land at Pirate Point. In 1838, Mitchell made his first venture into industrial properties with the commencement of a salt works at Stockton. However, this very quickly failed. Between 1840 and 1843, Mitchell ventured in another direction, building a tweed factory at Stockton on granted land he had cleared. The factory was located on the point where vessels turned from the harbour to go up to the river, close to the landing stage of what in 1889 became the Newcastle to Stockton vehicular punt. Being of Scottish descent, Mitchell would have known of the success of tweed factories in Scotland. Tweed is a rough woolen fabric closely woven with a soft, open, flexible texture. It is usually woven with a plain weave, twill, or herringbone structure. Nowadays, tweeds are an icon of traditional Scottish, Irish, Welsh, and English clothing, mainly used for outerwear due to the material being moisture-resistant and durable. This fabric is made to withstand harsh climates and commonly worn for outdoor activities such as shooting and hunting. An interesting excerpt from Wikipedia by Betty Kirkpatrick in her article Treacle, Toast and Tweed, English Word Origins for Language Lovers, explains the etymology of the name. The original name of the cloth was tweel, Scots for twill, the material being woven in a twilled rather than a plain pattern. A traditional story has the name coming about almost by chance. Around 1831, a London merchant, James Locke, received a letter from a Harwich firm, William Watson and Sons, Dangerfield Mills, about some tweels. The merchant misinterpreted the handwriting, understanding it to be a trade name taken from the River Tweed that flows through the Scottish Borders textile area. The goods were subsequently advertised as tweed, and the name has remained since. The following information on the Stockton Tweed Factory has been taken from the Newcastle and Hunter District Historical Society Monthly Journal, Volume 7, dated January 1953, in an article on Stockton by W. J. Gould. The factory was substantially built from brick and fitted with the latest machinery imported from England. At the rear was a large cleared paddock which was to be used for the drying and bleaching of the tweeds, and adjoining this was the manager's residence. A number of small brick cottages were also erected for the workmen. These in later years were known as White Row, due to the fact that they were kept regularly whitewashed. When the factory was completed in 1843, Dr. Mitchell leased it to Robert Fisher and Alexander Donaldson, under an agreement that the rent was to be paid in an equivalent of tweed. Robert Fisher, who was one of the early patrons of the turf in Newcastle, resided in the manager's cottage, near to which he had a track formed by cutting the scrub and trees down, and here he trained his horses. The Stockton Tweed Factory, under the control of Fisher and Donaldson, made great headway, and in a few years had built up a successful and profitable business. A number of weavers were brought out from the old country, and it is of interest to note that among them were two young Scotsmen, James and Alexander Brown, who, after their contract with the factory had expired, commenced mining at 4 Mile Creek, thereby laying the foundation of the noted coal mining firm of J&A Brown. In 1849, Mr. Donaldson withdrew from the firm and the factory was carried on by Mr. Fisher. At this time, between 200 and 300 hands were employed and were turning out tweeds considered by the press of the colony to be almost as good as the imported article. A billiard cloth was manufactured for Mr. Yeomans of the Northumberland Hotel of High Street, West Maitland. It was 10 yards long by 6 yards wide and was exhibited in Sydney and Newcastle before being delivered. During the year 1850, the Tweed Factory turned out some 70,000 yards of tweed and 800 yards of flannel, the tweeds selling at 3 shillings to 3 and 9 pence per yard. Most of the output went to supply contracts in China and the East. In the early hours of the 2nd of July 1851, the residents of the waterfront were awakened by the ringing of the bell of the steam packet Tamer, which was anchored in midstream. The crowd that soon gathered could see that a large fire was burning on the Stockton side of the harbour. It was the Stockton Tweed Factory, and it was ablaze from end to end. Crews from the Tamer, Thistle and Oriental were the first to join the Stockton people in forming up bucket brigades, but the intense heat soon drove them back. In the meantime, Mr. Fisher and the storekeeper, Mr. Knight, with other employees, endeavoured to save some of the valuable stock, but they were too late. In less than 3 hours, the building was completely gutted, involving a loss to the proprietor of over £26,000, the amount Dr. Mitchell assessed as the damage. The final phase of this disaster is found in a notice that appeared in the Maitland Mercury on the 16th of July 1851. We, the undersigned residents, etc., do hereby certify that at the request of Mr. Robert Fisher of Stockton, on the 11th instant, did make a careful and searching inspection of the ruins of the late Tweed manufactory, which was unfortunately destroyed by fire, and we unanimously are of the opinion that the disastrous event could not have been an accident, but must have been caused by some foul and malignant incendiary. Signed, Alexander Livingston, Harbour Master, Simon Kemp, Builder, Martin Richardson, Builder, William Henry White, Contractor, Thomas Bridges, Bricklayer, James Hannell, Hotel Keeper, and J. Cohen of Sydney. The Maitland Mercury and Hunter River General Advertiser, dated Saturday the 5th of July 1851, in an article detailing the fire, gives a description of some of the buildings at the Tweed Factory. There was a washing house, a carding room, and a willy house, which was the building in which wool to be manufactured passed through the process commonly called breaking or deviling. In these buildings were contained 2 high-pressure steam engines and much valuable machinery. A building opposite housed the mulling loft and weaving apartment. Mulling was a specific type of spinning machinery used in the past, particularly in the cotton industry. It was a key component of the mule spinning process, which was a complex and somewhat delicate method of spinning yarn. While mulling was a significant part of the history of yarn production, it is not a technique directly used in modern tweed making. A wing of this building was used as an office, press room and store. The factory was never rebuilt, and where it once stood is now open parkland. However, after repairs to the burnt-out buildings, a tannery opened in 1864. The premises were equipped so that 1,000 sheepskins could be processed each week by a staff of 20. These skins were mostly used to make aprons for masons and blacksmiths. The Newcastle Chronicle, dated 6th of December 1873, has an advertisement for letting of the commodious and centrally situated premises known as the Stockton Tannery. It states that the building was 125 by 60 feet with upstairs and downstairs apartments and was, in every respect, well furnished for the purposes of a first-class tannery. It had 12 tan pits, which were quite watertight, and immediately adjoined an extensive drying ground for wool washing. There was also a substantial wharf connected to the works by a tramway. Throughout the 20th century, Stockton established itself as a predominantly working-class suburb and is now mostly associated with residential and leisure activities such as dining, surfing, fishing and sport. It is rich in history, showcasing some glorious heritage homes, churches and hotels. The Stockton Tweed Factory was the first and only tweed factory in the Newcastle region at its peak being one of the largest factories in the colony, supplying over a third of the colony's needs. However, it met a tragic end. One wonders how long the factory would have lasted if not for foul play.
That's the story for today, a reminder that even the quiet corners of our suburbs can hold extraordinary histories. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us again as we uncover more of the tales that shaped our region and the people who lived here on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.